Well, as you know, China is currently one of the most important countries in the world, and in many diverse fields we have to follow what China is doing, the reality and the plans that are made in China, obviously. And when we make investigations about China, and I'm trying to do it, we see a tendency that, well, they actually have a very interesting mix of policies. Because they have very pragmatic policies, they are very flexible in terms of changing the policy if they realize that the policies are not that good. So they have pilot projects, for instance, so they can they have the flexibility to change it if it's necessary, and so on. But on the other hand, they have this tendency of having long-term projects, which is really, really interesting. They think about the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, or even 100 years. And currently, one of the maybe the most, certainly the most important long-term plan proposed by China is the Belt and Road Initiative. In my opinion, and that's why I raised this question in the beginning, in Brazil, I don't know in other countries, but in Brazil, people are still not aware of the dimension of this plan. And the meaning of this plan involves economic and political terms for the world in the near future. So I strongly recommend you to follow this initiative. It comprehends projects in many different fields, so related to foreign policy, China's foreign policy, but also to domestic policies in China, and it's quite impressive in its ambition, in the diversity of dimensions it touches, in the number of countries. I'm gonna tell you about the number of countries, in the resources involved, so it's really a quite impressive plan. And one of the problems when we start studying it, and I know that some of the students are doing it as well, is that we have a lack of organized information about the Belt and Road. But all over the world, the media and academia in the universities, people are trying to collect information. We have some websites. This one is an interesting one, which try to bring information, to collect information about this plan. And that's what I will try to do here with you. Before starting, I just want you to know that I'm basing my presentations in some papers that I wrote or that I'm writing with some colleagues. So one of them with Nicholas Blickstadt, which is a PhD student here, the other one with Daniela Prates, which is a professor here, and Marina Sequete, with a PhD, defended her thesis here, and the other one with Peter Mosias from Higher School of Economics. Yes, it's a joint, yes, I didn't know that. A joint research coming out of BRICS NU. That's it. I won't use PPT. I will do it in the old school style, but the structure of my lecture will go into the following topics. So a brief introduction of what is Belt and Road Initiative, then the resources involved, then the countries involved, the objectives of Belt and Road initiatives. Then I'm going to spend a longer time, because this is maybe the most important thing for us to discuss. And finally, Belt and Road Initiative and BRICS. Right. What is Belt and Road Initiative? The name, initially, it was named as the Silk Road Economic Belt. And it's important to go into this original name, and sometimes even today people refer to it as the new Silk Road. And what is the Silk Road, the original Silk Road? It was composed by a diversity of roads, so it was not only one road, obviously, but a diversity of roads connecting Asia and Europe in the ancient times. It used to go from Xi'an, the city of Xi'an, which is a former Chinese capital, right, for a long period. At that time, it had another name, I don't know how to pronounce, and coming to Antioch, nowadays in Turkey. And And some Chinese documents register the existence of this Silk Road at least since the 2nd century before Christ. So it's a really old, ancient road. Some historians claim that it's even older, but still at least from the 2nd century before Christ. And these roads were used mainly for the transit of goods, obviously. Merchants who were traveling through these roads willing to sell the goods. And the most valuable one at the time was silk. That's why this road is named as the Silk Road. But obviously, the transit of people, and those who study immigration, you know better than me, the transit of people brings also a transit of culture. So it's also a way of exchanging culture among different regions in the world. So many Chinese inventions reached the West through this so-called Silk Road, and also the other way around. So Western culture, including some religions, have reached Asia through this Silk Road. And then thousands of years later, now in the 2nd decade of the 21st century, China reclaimed this idea of the Silk Road to propose the reconstitution of a commercial axe crossing Eurasia. The plan was announced by President Xi Jinping during an official visit to Kazakhstan in September 2013, so 6 years ago. It's a recent plan. And it was not by chance that it was announced there in Kazakhstan. This region in Central Asia is crucial for this plan, for this axe, because of its geographical position, obviously, here. But also because it's a very important source of energy. We have Zafar here, who is from Tajikistan, and know much more than me about these Central Asian countries. But then this being launched in Kazakhstan is not by chance. And then since 2013, since this announcement by President Xi Jinping, this new Silk Road became the heart, really the heart of most Chinese policies, domestically and the foreign policies as well. Gradually, it originated an enormous quantity of associated plans in the fields of commerce, finance, diplomacy, but also education. You can see nowadays some scholarships, which are scholarships on Silk Road projects, Silk Road committees, university committees, I mean. So for researches, for culture, it involves nowadays more than 100 countries. I can give you the precise number later. According to the official document, and I'm going to read it for you. The initiative is a Chinese program whose goal is to maintain an open world economic system. This is important for us to understand. An open world economic system. And achieve diversified, independent, balanced, and sustainable development. And also a Chinese proposal intended to advance regional cooperation, strengthen communication between civilizations, and safeguard world peace and stability. So this is in the core of the official document of the Belt and Road Initiative. More concretely, the main goal of the initiative is to create the necessary infrastructure to connect all involved countries. So this is the first thing that is involved in the infrastructure. The first, let's say, level of the plan is about infrastructure to connect the involved countries. And this is important for us to understand that it should be done, and it is being done, both through land and sea. So originally the idea was that it would be only for land, but now it involves also sea. So through land, the name is Silk Road Economic Belt, designed in 3 routes. So one from northern China to Europe and the Baltic Sea. The other one for the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean Sea, so here. And the other one going south. So one for Europe, one for the Middle East, and one going south to India and south of Asia. through land. And then through sea, the name is 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, and it's planned over 2 major routes. The first one, connecting the ports of China's coast, crossing the southern China Sea to Malacca Strait, so here. And this is a crucial point for the plan as a whole. I'm going to explain later, the Malacca Strait. And the other one connecting here with Africa. They also have, as you can see, a plan of reaching the North Pole. So this would be for the future, dealing with the climate change. Maybe the North Pole will be also a place for navigation. So the idea is to create new roads and railways going continuously from, let's say, Shanghai to Amsterdam. It's really, when I say that it's really an impressive plan, it is an impressive plan. We would be able to go from Shanghai to Amsterdam through land, but obviously the main idea is not for us passengers, but for goods, and creating new ports, then mainly in Asia and Africa, opening new marine routes. It would facilitate the transport of people, as I said, but obviously the main important role would be for the transportation of goods throughout these areas. Besides that, the Belt and Road Initiative has also the aim of ameliorating the infrastructure for the transportation of energy. So it involves also new pipelines and also new grids throughout these countries, with the clear purpose of allowing new and cheaper sources of energy, mostly for China, obviously. So in this map, you can also see that there are oil pipelines and gas pipelines going to Central Asia and some other countries. Finally, the initiative intends to develop also the connection through air, aviation, so airports, space, information network. Then we do have 6 ways: railways, highways, sea, aviation, pipelines, aerospace, and integrated information network through space. So it's really a broad plan, but obviously it's concentrated in highways, railways, ports, and these pipelines. Resources. There are no precise data on that. It's not easy to do this calculation. But some estimations indicate that the total amount of investments would reach $1 trillion. Just some analysts, they even declare that it's the most impressive infrastructure plan in the history of humanity. Just to establish a comparative perspective, the World Bank itself declared that its commitment in infrastructure in all countries that are related to Belt and Road altogether reached 80 billion. So it's much less than these $1 trillion that might be involved in the Belt and Road initiative. And for the provision of these resources, China has created a fund. The name is Silk Road Fund, with an initial capital of 40 billion. And we have the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that was launched in December 2015, with the aim of financing regional connectivity and industrial development. So this bank, AIIB, is not only for the Belt and Road, but obviously it's an important institution for the provision of funds for the Belt and Road initiative. Moreover, the existing Chinese banks, the China Development Bank, the Export-Import Bank of China, are being massively used as well to provide funds for this initiative. And the China Export and Credit Insurance Corporation is playing an important role as well for the insurance. And the idea, as you can see, is combining both public direct investments, public credit to private enterprises, but and also the private resources to be involved in these investments, the planned investments. So public and private resources combined. within public investment, public resources, sorry, through credit or through direct investments. The group of countries. It's a really wide group of countries involved in this initiative and quite heterogeneous. For obvious reasons, the initial focus was over Eurasia, so Central Asia, but well, Europe and Asia as a whole. Eurasia continent has been one of the major engines of global economic growth in the past. And then the idea is somehow bringing again the center of gravity of the world economy to Eurasia. But the African continent is also in the core of the plan when we go into the maritime dimension, which is also really important. The initiative mentions as well, currently, they are talking about involving also Latin America, Oceania and Pacific Islands, so it's going wider and wider. So it's something like the whole world, but North America, I'd say. But obviously Latin America is still not an important part of the plan. That's why this map goes only to Africa and does not even show America. In terms of the position in the world economy, among the countries which are actively involved in the initiative, there is a clear predominance of what we name here Unicamp as peripheral countries. It does not mean that the center countries, the developed countries are not part of the plan, but when we see the list, we see that we have much more peripheral countries, not only because they are the majority of the countries of the world, but because the acceptance is higher among the peripheral countries as well. For geopolitical reasons that I will discuss later, there has been a higher resistance in some countries, some center countries, to get into this plan. And for peripheral countries, sometimes the acceptability is higher because it constitutes an easy source of funds, let's say, arriving by a channel that does not involve commitments with the multilateral institutions. It involves some commitments, but different ones. I'm going to also mention that later. So it may be seen as an easy source of funds. Even within underdeveloped countries, there is no full acceptability, obviously. Some countries are resistant, but many countries, underdeveloped countries, are getting into this initiative. The central point maybe to understand is that the loans coming from the International Monetary Fund, from the World Bank, normally imply strong conditionalities, such as fiscal policy constraints or requirements related to economic or political reforms. And for some countries, the access to large credits that are in principle exempt of conditionalities may appear as a very good deal. These loans tend to follow the Chinese foreign policy discourse of non-intervention in the domestic affairs of any other country. So the funding lines are normally offered without any discrimination in terms of the political regime or the country's economic situation. Countries with right-wing governments or left-wing governments are receiving, so no discrimination. And no requirement of political or economic reforms. So the acceptability in many countries tends to be high. Then, one important thing also for us to understand is that by creating these alternative sources of international funds, the Belt and Road Initiative reduces the importance of the multilateral institutions. It has happened also with the Marshall Plan, which was many authors, including myself, are writing and making researches about a possible comparison between the Marshall Plan and the Belt and Road Initiative. And in both cases, we have loans that finally somehow reduce the importance of the multilateral institutions, or at least the traditional ones like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. And some new institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the new Development Bank as well, the BRICS Bank, may be more involved in the provision of funds for this initiative. However, obviously, and you are probably thinking already about that, the exemption of conditionalities, although there is this exemption of conditionalities, the Belt and Road loans may clearly create a lack of autonomy for the country receiving funds, and this is important for us to understand. Mainly when the loans are high, related to the GDP of the countries, it may create the classical problem of, let's say, a kind of debt trap. There are already some cases that the media is exploring. In Myanmar, for instance, a port project reaches $9 billion US dollars, which is equivalent to 14% of the country's GDP. So compared to the country's GDP, it's a lot of money. And then it may, if they have non-performing loans, it may create a debt trap. In the first 5 years, we see already these cases in Pakistan as well. Programs related to the debt payments of funds invested in Guadalajara port resulted in the leasing of the port for Chinese companies for 43 years. In Sri Lanka, some negotiations also involving the funds invested in another port, Hambantota port, were solved with a leasing as well of 99 years. So this debt-to-asset solution may obviously end in long-term constraints for these countries. In some other cases, the negotiations related to debt reliefs, related to Chinese loans, may result in agreements involving the provision of natural resources. So not the leasing of the infrastructure, but rather the commitment of providing natural resources to China for a certain period. So, for instance, long-term oil contracts. This is already the case also in Djibouti, Laos, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Montenegro. So we already have some examples of these programs related to the payment that are solved through either natural resources long-term contracts or infrastructure leasing. But, and it is also important to be said, many of these countries I just mentioned, they were already indebted with other countries, with other multilateral institutions. So it's also not fair to say that only China is creating this debt trap in these countries. When the Western media tries to say that China is doing it, this does not tell the whole story. Many Western countries and institutions are also responsible for it. At the same time, and this is interesting, the Belt and Road Initiative is pushing some center countries to react. They see that China has an increasing power, geopolitical power over many countries in the world, and the Belt and Road Initiative may be used for this purpose. And then the center countries react by offering also financial support for investments related also to infrastructure or for the facilitation of commerce in Asia and Africa. So Stratford is an author who shows that Australia is also involved in an effort to regain the role it used to have in the South Pacific. The United States, India, and Japan are also developing a program for infrastructure in Africa and so on. So we can see some reactions according to Stratford related to this Belt and Road Initiative from the central countries. And the reactions make clear, obviously, that the center countries interpret the Belt and Road as much more than a simple plan for integrating the world and fostering the world trade. The perception is that the initiative is part of a broader framework involving the Chinese intentions of increasing its influence over the world, politically and economically. And to finish with the countries involved, by the end of March 2019, so this year, the last information I have, China had signed 173 cooperation agreements with 125 countries and 29 international organizations all over the world in the framework of the Belt and Road. So more than 100 countries, 125, and then 29 international organizations. Coming now to the core of my presentation, which is related to the objectives of Belt and Road for China. Notably for China. Since it's a Chinese plan, it's understandable. First of all, the first objective is the facilitation of the world commerce. China has been faced in a situation of lower economic dynamism in the world after the outbreak of the global economic crisis. Even a decade later, the international trade is still not growing in the pace it was before 2008. Robert has mentioned it yesterday. So, more than that, it gave rise to protectionism. Protectionist policies in many countries in the world. And obviously, the most paradigmatic case is in the US. The policy implemented by Donald Trump resulting in the so-called trade war. So one of the main reasons for the Belt and Road Initiative is fostering the international trade. This is in the official documents, and it is indeed one of the main reasons. It's also interesting to see that currently China is the country which is playing the role that was played by the US in the past as the advocate of the free trade in the world. It's interesting to see for the international trade. And one of the ways of fostering the international trade is obviously through a better physical integration between the countries. The transportation costs for the regions involved in the infrastructure investment plans tend to decline substantially, both in terms of resources and time. Just to give you an example, I read that for some goods to go from Shanghai to Rotterdam, the time may be halved, declining from 60 days to 30 days for the transportation of goods. So in this sense, Chinese goods will be even cheaper in Europe and vice versa. So on the other hand, these new and ameliorated land and maritime routes will allow commodities and intermediate goods to go to China with lower prices as well, obviously. Since China is also deeply connected with the global value chains, it's important for them to both export their goods, but also to import final, but also these intermediate goods that are important for the Chinese industry. So it tends to increase the demand for Chinese exports, but also to facilitate Chinese imports. Creating this network of intermediate goods that is important for the so-called Asian industry. Studies. Connected to this stimulus to the world trade, and then we move to the second and related, obviously, objective, there is a clear stimulus for the Chinese economy itself, for Chinese economic dynamism, obviously, coming from the exports, but not only, because the investments proposed in the Belt and Road Initiative may be themselves already a great source of demand for Chinese companies. If they happen inside China or outside China, both. They can be done by Chinese companies. Or they can involve at least the purchase of Chinese goods. So this is actually a crucial issue for us to understand the whole framework in which the Belt and Road Initiative appears. After the outbreak of the global financial crisis, as you know, with the decline of the world trade, all countries in the world had economic problems, obviously, and even China had a decline in their economic growth, and they reacted to it by launching a counter-cyclical policy, monetary, and fiscal policy that was quite successful in terms of the resistance of the GDP growth to go down. China's GDP grew 9% in 2009, for instance, and we had 0% growth in Brazil, for instance, 10% in 2010. But obviously, these counter-cyclical policies, they contributed to deepening another problem, an important problem of Chinese economy, which is the high level of idle capacity. Some reports show that the idle capacity in China is really high in various sectors nowadays. In 2016, for instance, 61% of the consulted companies in China alleged having excessive idle capacity. Among the 35 industrial sectors analyzed at that time by Center of Finance and Economic Growth, 18 out of 35 declared having a severe idle capacity, which is defined when more than 10% of the companies declare having an idle capacity that is higher than 20%. So in this whole context, it was indeed a convenient idea for China to launch a worldwide infrastructure plan, which may foster the demand for goods produced in these sectors, operating with overcapacity. Connected to that, the plan is implemented in a moment in which the big Chinese companies are intensifying their investment and operations abroad, for brownfield and greenfield operations. And obviously, Belt and Road Initiative can contribute to this process of Chinese companies going abroad, making investments abroad. Well, in the official documents, when you go into the details, you can also realize that there is another important thing that China wants to export besides goods, besides investments, let's say exports of investments, outward investments. But the idea is also exporting technology, technological standards, obviously. By making or coordinating infrastructure projects, infrastructure investments in many regions in Eurasia, in Africa, Chinese companies may set a certain standard of technology that's being developed in China. So for the high-speed trains, for instance, everybody knows that China is already top level. And it's unquestionable that the Chinese companies have very high level of technology for high-speed trains. They can already compete with Western countries, traditional companies. So by doing these investments in this region, it's also a way of exporting these technological standards. Concerning the new suppliers or new routes for the transportation, and then another objective, it's important to highlight also that there is not only an economic but also a geopolitical movement. The economic benefits are related to the lower transportation costs, as I said, but the geopolitical issue comes from the constitution of alternative routes for some very unstable supplier countries or some very politically sensible routes. Opening new routes may reduce the economic impact of eventual problems related to the traditional routes. And here, this is important for all kinds of goods, obviously, but particularly important for one essential good, which for the goods which are really crucial for China, but for one essential thing, which is energy. So for some analysts even claim that this is the most important reason of Belt and Road as a whole. I wouldn't say that, because as we see, there are many different reasons, but it is certainly one of the really important reasons. And the best example comes precisely from the Strait of Malacca, which I showed you, which is here. It's a very narrow strait and in a very sensible area, and 80% of the oil that China imports which comes from from the sea, from maritime routes, crosses this Strait of Malacca, and it's a strait which can be easily blocked. So constituting new routes is very important for all kinds of goods, but notably for energy transportation, oil, for instance. Beyond energy, energy is important for both economic and political reasons, but there is another thing that is also important for economic and political reasons, that is currency. Yesterday, Robert Goodman also mentioned this. Mentioned the idea of internationalizing the renminbi. Money is power, as you know, and having an international currency undeniably increases the power of a country in the world system. We saw it well in the economic history with the US, with the dollar, with the UK and the pound, and China is aware of these benefits which arise from having an international currency, the exorbitant privilege. So Chinese government is also implementing some measures to facilitate the international usage of the Chinese renminbi. And the Belt and Road Initiative may be used as an important framework to this internationalization process as well. It's very clear also in the official documents. A non-negligible part of the Belt and Road Initiative's investments will be made by Chinese companies, which means that at least a part of the credit lines may be given, so they can come with the two parts, giving credits in renminbi that will be used to hire Chinese companies, in renminbi. So it creates also the circulation of renminbi outside China. And this may be also a stimulus for the increasing number of offshore centers that are being constituted worldwide by the People's Bank of China to operate this Chinese currency. So it may integrate productive and financial necessities of the Chinese economy, resulting in benefits from both economic and geopolitical perspectives. Within this same framework that involves economic and geopolitical dimensions, some analysts claim that behind the Belt and Road Initiative there might be also military purposes. It's a delicate and political subject, but the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, expressed its worries, and some reports show also that military worries appear in some countries' media coverage related to that. One additional important reason is the plan to reduce the regional disparities faced in China. China has important problems of inequality, as Professor Moore showed us yesterday, both in terms of within regions, but also within the whole country between those regions. There is a huge gap between the eastern part and the western part of China, so connecting Eurasia means connecting also China itself. So investing in the western part of China, this is another important reason. Finally, the global financial crisis that started in the US but very strongly hit the Eurozone has raised questions about a possible reconfiguration of the world economy. Political order, as Robert Goodman also talked yesterday. And in this context, the Belt and Road Initiative may be seen as an attempt to bring back the center of gravity of the world economy to Eurasia, as it was already before the Industrial Revolution. Some historians attest that China and India were the wealthiest countries in the world. So it would be somehow a return of the center of gravity of the world economy to Eurasia that may be seen as also one of the aims of the Belt and Road Initiative. And having discussed these many dimensions and objectives of the Belt and Road Initiative, we can come maybe to the most important point, in my opinion at least, the most important point, that actually explains all other or almost all other objectives. The Chinese economic system is facing now, in a more intense way, what the US economy faced in the 40s and 50s, which is a necessity to increase its connections to the globe. And this is not related to cultural aspects, because there are many persons discuss that well, Chinese culture is different. They are not prone to have this extroversion. They could have done it before the Industrial Revolution, but they didn't do it. They used it to have even boats with a higher technology than the Western ones, so they could have conquered the whole world before the Industrial Revolution and so on. But in this case, in my opinion, and we can discuss it later, it's not related to cultural aspects, to political traditions or whatever. The main engine of this process is the historical necessity of capital to search for valorization in an unlimited way. And here I come to the core of my presentation. It leads any market economy to a quest for low-cost suppliers, for markets, for its products, for places to establish companies that will later send their profits back, for agents willing to take credit, and so on. So the transition to a market economy that was explained yesterday by Professor Lu, that's going on in China since the late 70s, reached a point in which this extroversion is necessary. After all, market economy is extroversive by definition. So this necessity comes hand to hand to all other kinds of extroversions. So in my opinion, China's economic necessity of extroversion is therefore the key element for us to understand the Belt and Road Initiative. I have 5 more minutes, maybe a bit more, so I'll go quickly into the last part of my presentation. We try to connect a little bit Belt and Road Initiative and BRICS. There is a concern in BRICS countries, the other BRICS countries, that the group as a whole may lose importance in the framework of the Chinese foreign policy due to Belt and Road Initiative. BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative are obviously not contradictory. In theory, they may be also seen as complementary, but some representatives from Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa have been expressing the sentiment that the Belt and Road Initiative may somehow reduce the importance or the centrality of BRICS for Chinese foreign policy. That's why I raised the question yesterday to the South African colleagues, because I've been listening to it from some people. But obviously it's also important to understand that a relevant reason for this declining importance of BRICS comes from the economic and political crisis in some of these BRICS countries, notably in Brazil, but also South Africa. And more importantly, from the new political orientation, notably for the foreign policy in Brazil after the coup d'etat in 2016, which gives total priority to the relation with the USA and Western Europe. So after 2016, deliberately they are declaring that, well, not anymore Southern relations, we want to be relation with the US and Western Europe. So the challenges are different for each BRICS country, but we do have in Brazil important challenges that I will talk a little bit in a few minutes. And the challenge also in which is connected not to BRICS, but now to the Belt and Road Initiative are also different. For Russia, and then you will tell me later if it's true or not, but what I see is that we cannot ignore that it may create some tensions regarding the Central Asian countries that have been historically connected to Russia, and very important for Moscow, for both economic, security reasons. And in this sense, Russia and this Peter Mosias also mentions very importantly that does not want the Belt and Road Initiative to undermine the Eurasian Economic Union. So this is important for Russia. In spite of that, the participation of Russia in the Belt and Road Initiative may be fruitful in some aspects. Russia being a transit country, really important for the services in Russia, for instance, and so on. India is one of the countries expressing more suspicions regarding the Belt and Road Initiative. Besides its historical tensions with China, the most important reason for us to understand is that there is a plan for the construction of a China-Pakistan corridor, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And it would cross the area of Kashmir, which, as you know, is a very disputed area. So the Indian government has declared that it consisted in a violation of the national sovereignty in India. So India has not attended the Belt and Road forums and is openly criticizing the initiative for its lack of transparency and its incitation to that. The Prime Minister, Modi, has been personally raising public concerns about the project, even claiming that it may be used for military purposes. And what is interesting is that India is one of the countries that is responding to the Belt and Road Initiative by launching or revising some initiatives for regional cooperation outside the framework of the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is one of the responses. Well, Brazil, due to the geographical position, initially it was not part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But since the initiative has been widened to include also Latin American countries, some dialogues about a possible participation have been initiated. Brazil is already receiving Chinese investments related to infrastructure, notably to energy. The company we're going to visit is a Chinese company nowadays, so it's the result of Chinese investments in energy. And the official participation in the Belt and Road Initiative for Brazil would mean the inclusion of some of these investments under the umbrella of Belt and Road, but also a possible expansion of these investments to other fields. Infrastructure related to transportation of soybeans, iron, and so on. But, and this is very important, the political tensions between the two countries may be seen as an obstacle. As you know, you probably know, the Brazilian president, current President Jair Bolsonaro, made very harsh declarations against China, trying to please or to pretend he's Trump, to be like Trump. He has made these declarations during the elections, very harsh declarations. But what we see is that in spite of all this discourse, the Brazilian government is totally aware of the importance of China for the Brazilian economy. So it's step by step re-establishing pragmatic relations with China. This role is being played by the Vice President, Hamilton Mourão. He was recently in China, and he said recently that Brazil was open to discuss its participation at the Belt and Road Initiative. South Africa, it is still under the effects of a political and economic crisis like Brazil. In 2018, the GDP growth in South Africa has been one of the lowest in the whole continent. So in this sense, the investments related to the Belt and Road Initiative may appear also as an important source of dynamism for a weakened economy. The same for Brazil. But the imperative problem is the probable maintenance of South Africa's role as only a supplier of mineral goods and energy to China. So David Moniari, which is a scholar from Johannesburg, says that South Africa has to search for a more prominent role in the Belt and Road Initiative, because within BRICS, it was presented as the representative of Africa, so in these discussions it would represent Africa. It would be like the gateway of Africa for the other countries of BRICS. And then with the Belt and Road Initiative, it's totally different. It's being done by China bilaterally with other countries in Africa. So in this end, with the African Union as well. So in this sense, it undermines the South African leadership. It may undermine South African leadership in the region. And finishing my analysis, for the peripheral countries as a whole, not only BRICS, but then going to the peripheral countries as a whole. We have the risk of debt traps, which may be considered, notably in international currencies. It's an important risk. But there is something that has also to be discussed and analyzed in Brazil, in South Africa, and many peripheral countries in the world, which is the risk of being more and more specialized in commodity goods. By heightening the commercial integration with China, these countries, these peripheral countries, have the risk of perpetuating their roles in the international division of labor as only suppliers of mineral goods, agricultural goods, and or low value-added intermediate goods for the Chinese manufacturing. So the integration of these countries with China, a deeper integration of this country with China, this integration is already happening. But Belt and Road Initiative may deeper it, and then it creates this higher risk of perpetuating this condition of, for us, in the international division of labor as a whole, but also in our relation with China as only suppliers of low value-added goods. That's why the initiative required deep analysis and sincere dialogues. To all of us. So thank you very much. Let's go for the questions.